Today, we're going to have a look at covert abuse, a form of abuse that is the common thread in all relational abuse cases. We'll define and shed light on why it's considered the common thread in things like child molestation, schoolyard bullying, domestic violence, workplace sabotage, and so forth. And I'll discuss the signs and what it may look or feel like for the one who's experiencing covert abuse, as well as learn to identify these tactics and how covert abuse affects various relationships. I will also explain the difference between covert emotional abuse and coercive control. And finally, I will wrap up by providing hope for help and healing for those who are experiencing these types of complicated and toxic relationships. So what is covert abuse? Covert means hidden or secret. Covert abuse involves hidden manipulative tactics that are hard to name and hard to describe. Without having the ability to apply the proper language to define these behaviors, they're nearly impossible for you to identify what they are, let alone confront them, leaving the person on the receiving end often in a state of being bewildered, confused, highly stressed for years or even decades. Covert abuse isn't obvious either to the victim or to those that are witnessing the relationship from the outside. Often it appears as though something is off, but you just can't quite put your finger on it. Abusers use various types of hidden behaviors frequently, if not continuously, and it's intended to manipulate, control, or subdue their target. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't good parts to the relationship. There are, but when there's a conflict or when you're sharing your feelings, you're likely to experience several tactics of covert emotional abuse. This is why I teach that covert emotional abuse is the common thread in all abuse cases, except for one-time physical assaults, because that's not a relationship. And because covert emotional abuse is used to maintain power and control by keeping the victim off kilter. The covert abuser will even use a shred of truth and distort it, or use the victim's vulnerabilities and twist them in ways that are designed to weaken the victim's position in the relationship, make them question their own reality, and deceive them into believing false narratives. You know, when the one who's causing harm will rewrite history and say, I never said that, or you said this, or something of that sort, distorting what really occurred. These mind games confuse the person being harmed and create significant emotional duress and physical stress. There's another form of emotional abuse that plays off of covert emotional abuse, and that's called overt emotional abuse. Some will say that overt abuse can be easier to recognize. It includes more obvious behaviors such as raging, threatening, name calling, loud put downs, etc. But overt emotional abuse, in some cases, not all, enables the victim to more easily explain to themselves and to their partner and others what is wrong, understanding that so the victim is able to discern accurately that something is off or wrong with their partner. Whereas in covert emotional abuse, oftentimes victims think that something is wrong with themselves, that they could actually do something to change the dynamics in the relationship. They become confused, they overfunction, working, doing the work, the emotional work in the relationship for both parties, and they're exhausted by constantly being met with some of the behaviors I'm going to discuss now. The first covert behavior I want to talk about is minimization. That's where the victim's perspective is belittled with the intention to make what he or she values unimportant and ultimately destroy their confidence. Or maybe it's to destroy their creativity or individuality through these, by minimizing what's important to them. Another term I want to discuss is blame shifting, where the abuser not only refuses to take responsibility, which is a common tactic that you can apply to any of these behaviors, this where they just never own and take responsibility, or if they do, it's very minimal. And they assign the liability to the victim. So that's what blame shifting is. It's saying things like, I wouldn't have gotten angry if you'd just done what I said when I asked you, or joking sarcastically and then blaming the victim for being too sensitive when he or she objects. So they get the brunt of the joke, and then they also get told you're too sensitive when they say that was hurtful. That is blame shifting. Another term is deflection, where the abuser refuses to discuss a problem in a healthy way that would actually move to a mutually agreeable solution. Instead, they change the topic or switch it around on the victim so the victim can hardly remember what started the argument or discussion in the first place. We've all had a conversation with someone who just changes the subject and goes back to what happened before that has no, it's not trying to describe a pattern of behavior. It's just simply changing the topic and derailing the conversation. That's deflection. Okay, the next term I want to talk about is withholding. Abusers will withhold affection, or they'll control when affection can actually take place. They may also withhold conversations altogether, so the victim is shut down, sometimes for days or even weeks at a time. Using the silent treatment as a form of punishment is one example. And in the definition of withholding, I just want to state two things to consider. When a victim withholds affection because a boundary has been broken or something really hurtful has happened, that's not an abusive display. It is simply somebody trying to hold a boundary. And when a victim decides to not communicate with the abuser because the style of communication is unhealthy, that's another example of setting a boundary. I'm talking in withholding, I'm talking about the abuser controls like when intimacy can and cannot occur, and pressures. It's a mechanism of control, and then using the silent treatment as a form of retaliation or punishment. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is false accusations. We all know if we've been falsely accused of something, how much anxiety and distress it causes, because if it was said in public, then suddenly you are accused of something that you didn't do, and it undermines, it mischaracterizes your personhood. And it puts the victim on the defense and derails the conversation. This tactic is often used in couple therapy in order to place the victim on the hot seat and derail the point of the session, like why they were there, what they were there to discuss. A false accusation hijacks the conversation, and then the victim wastes significant time explaining why that is not true and how it couldn't be true. Or the victim is met with an abuser who, like I mentioned before, avoids responsibility at all costs. An abuser who is chronically defensive. Defensiveness is a chronic pattern that you will see in every abuser's mindset. victims rarely receive a sincere apology for the abuse. And I mean an apology where the facial expressions and the body language is cohesive with the words that are being spoken. And an apology, a sincere apology, is an act that could bring healing or at least reset the situation so you can move forward. But a victim's most likely to be given a partial apology or an apology, but no change happens. So it's really not an apology because there's no change of behavior, or the victim will be blamed for the pain that he or she is feeling. As abusers are more interested in powering over the victim and winning arguments rather than in emotional connection or listening authentically to what someone really needs to share about how they're feeling. It's common for a covert abuser to shift from one tactic to another rather swiftly. If you call out an abuser and say, "You're minimizing me," then they're likely to immediately blame shift. For example, they might stop minimization for a time, but they're going to replace it with another behavior. And as these, in a conversation, particularly if there's a conflict and you're trying to move to a resolution, you're likely to experience multiple tactics being thrown at you as you're pleading to get to the bottom of things and not just be on the surface, but really uncover what the problems are. You're going to get a barrage of covert tactics. And it becomes then so difficult to identify the patterns or to recognize what's really happening. These behaviors create roadblocks in a conversation so that resolution of conflicts cannot be achieved. I just want to make one mention. If somebody were to only do one tactic, like lying is a covert abusive tactic, lie, you're going to quickly be able to say, "I can't trust my partner, they don't tell me the truth." You're able to identify it. If somebody does minimization, blame shifting, deflection, catastrophizing, scapegoating, and so many other terms that we have available on our website that I hope you will go and look at this comprehensive terms and definitions for you. But as multiple behaviors are at play, it's very difficult to identify the pattern. We have a visual that we use, and it's called the maze of confusion. And I'm just going to talk you through it after I take a sip of water. The maze, if you consider, this is a metaphor, a maze, we all know what a maze looks like. It has one entrance and one exit, and it has multiple dead ends. And so I like to consider the maze as an example of a conversation with a covert abuser. In a healthy relationship, the clear pathway to the exit point would be clarifying the problem, mutual listening, a desire to understand each other, mutual understanding, mutual respect, mutual validation, and finally, solutions. But when you're talking with a covert abuser, particularly if you are in a conflict or you're raising a complaint or a concern, you're not going to get on that pathway to a solution. You're going to hit multiple roadblocks, and those roadblocks, those dead ends, represent various covert behaviors to block your attempts to have an authentic conversation. So if you consider blame shifting, minimization, defensiveness, not taking responsibility, deflections, false accusations, you can see how these behaviors will hijack reasonable attempts to reach an amicable solution. There are many more behaviors that I mentioned. There's cover-ups, there's broken promises, and so much more that you can find on our website. Also, I want to note that there are early detection signs of covert abuse. Abusers will not come right out with all these tactics at the beginning of a relationship. I mean, some will, but mostly that's not the way it unfolds. they usually begin really subtly. They test you to see what you will allow. For example, oftentimes an abuser will begin by telling a joke at your expense, or a put down quickly accompanied by, I was only kidding. And if you get upset, like I said before, don't be so sensitive. But they test you. And that's often, joking is often the first sign of an abusive relationship. A healthy person will tell jokes that are funny that actually requires more intellect so that everybody can laugh. I mean, we can all laugh at ourselves, but when something is really to put you down in an area of sensitivity, that's a joke at someone's expense. And that's what abusers do with their jokes. It's always at somebody's expense. And these behaviors will increase over time. At the beginning of the relationship, they may say something like, I'm uncomfortable with you having old boyfriends and your contact information on your phone. Or, you're my soulmate. They rush to this love bombing stage. Or, you're the most important person in the world to me, while they're also putting you down with jokes and using other covert behaviors. So you're getting a positive message, but so you overlook the negative behaviors because they're so subtle. And they indicate that someone really wants to power over and control you. And it increases, abuse increases, it accelerates over time. If you were in a healthy relationship, I just want to clarify this. Nobody's going to say, you're my soulmate at the beginning of the relationship. They're not going to rush to that kind of intimacy. That is a red flag. So for victims inside these relationships and for responders who are walking alongside, it's essential to have a keen eye on recognizing covert abusive behaviors. It's essential to understand the mindset and the attitudes driving the abuser's behaviors. I want to just make a sidebar. I really encourage you to go to our website and print, it's downloadable for free in a PDF fashion, print the terms and definitions of these other covert behaviors. Really examine them, circle the ones that you've experienced, and really start to try to identify the common tactics that your partner uses so that you will not be blindsided in a conversation and get stuck engaging in a hopeless conversation. I want you to be able to identify what it is and recognize it. And the only way you're going to get that kind of command over your own intellect and your own body sensations is to really take some time understanding those terms and definitions. I started to say it's important to understand the attitudes driving the abuser's behavior. Having this knowledge too will help answer the question many victims wonder, and that is, why are my empathic ways of communicating not generating an empathic response in return? Well, I want to touch on this. Abusers operate from a completely different worldview, or you could say another way, a completely different playbook, or two separate realities, your reality and their reality. We have a graphic tool that's on our website titled The Pillars of Abuse that describes the pillars, represents the posts that really holds up an abusive mindset. What are those pillars? What are those attitudes? The pillars are beliefs that drive destructive actions. The first pillar is a faulty belief system. So that could be things like patriarchy, or if they're part of a cultural or religious community that believes that women are less than, they're not to be treated equally, they're not considered as intellectually capable, and a myriad of other things that we really go deeply into in our 4-week comprehensive curriculum. The next one after faulty belief systems is they have a sense of entitlement. They actually believe that they're entitled to special treatment, double standards, and so forth. And the next one is image management. They want to protect their public image. They want to appear as though they're one way, even though they're an entirely different way behind closed doors. And the last pillar is called a low emotional IQ. They can be highly intelligent and accomplished, but in terms of their emotional development, they are uncomfortable with emotions, theirs and yours. And we unpack that very thoroughly in our curriculum as well. So I hope that you'll join us, and you can find the link to that at our website at themenproject.com. Okay, now I'd like to ask a question. So please place your answers or comments in the chat. And it really helps when you engage. It helps everybody to relax and see that you're not alone, that there's a lot of us that are dealing with this. So I'd like to know if you've ever felt that you were in a maze of confusion while trying to have a conversation with your partner. Does that analogy resonate with you? I'd like to hear your feedback. And also another question, have any of you noticed one or more of the pillars of abuse as part of your partner's attitude or mindset regarding how they believe the relationship should function? So I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Well, Annette, we have a lot coming in here that is basically 1,000,000%, very often, yes, very often, definitely 100%, all caps, yes, always, yes, very much. And so a lot of always, yes, always, 100% a word salad, absolutely yes. So definitely, I mean, it just keeps going. I mean, we have so many responses to this question. Also, when you were speaking about the pillars of abuse, we did have someone who said, like, my husband has all 4 of these. And now looking at all the responses to your question, there's now multiple people saying my partner has all 4 pillars. So it's very relatable. And I can read some more of the longer comments if you want me to. Would you like me to share those at this time?
Let's see, how are we doing on time?
I think, why don't I read like a handful of them?
Sure, I'd love to hear them. I'm sure everyone would.
I know there's a lot. It's a lot here. There's like 30. So I'm just going to.
Oh gosh. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry if we don't get to yours.
Yeah.
But if there's an important question in the comments and we don't get to you, please email us, because I respond to every email. Either I do directly or someone on our team. We're growing a lot. We probably won't be able to do that forever, but right now I try to make sure that every email gets answered. So go ahead, shoot, Jill.
Yes. Okay. All right. So, okay. All of the time it says, I never realized how he switches tactics. So that was really helpful to hear. Yes, I was in an employment situation and it was hard to tell what was going on and scary. Feel like I live in a crazy house. I get really confused when we have arguments. I often forget what we even started talking about, and then I'm
yes,
that I have a bad memory.
yes. It is not you. It is their objective is to confuse you, to undermine you, to make you feel unstable about yourself. And it's quite effective. Don't feel bad. That is naturally what happens when you're talking to crazy. Crazy feels crazy. And an empathic person, like most victims and survivors are, they're empaths. They're first going to say, what did I do? What can I do? What is my responsibility? When that's the last thing that the abuser is thinking. They're thinking, how can I manipulate? How can I control this? How can I shut this down? So it's a very different mindset. Okay, go on, Jill.
Sure thing. to what you just said. It says, my husband can talk at great length, and he buries me in a sea of information and comments.
Mm.
Let's see. That says, every conversation where she didn't want to hear that she's done anything wrong or that my feelings and emotions made her uncomfortable. He would walk away in the middle of me trying to talk to him. A lot of people who've been in long relationships here, 30 years of confusion, 20 years since, and divorcing. So we have a lot of people who have experienced many, many years of this.
I'm so sorry. I know that there's so many feelings behind that. I tried so hard for so many years. I overfunctioned. I tried everything I could and nothing worked. Or why was I so fooled for so long? And then you beat yourself up for that. But don't do that. This covert emotional abuse is very effective. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are. We have women from leading Fortune 500 companies, physicians, therapists who have been in covert abusive relationships and not been able to identify it. So you're not alone.
Yes. Let's see. Someone wrote, you're hallucinating. A lot of people really saying how the pillars of abuse really helped to make things much clearer.
Hmm.
And let's see, every pillar of abuse. Let's see.
So I just want to, since so many people are commenting on the pillars, I just want to say that I wasn't going to talk about this today, but I'm just going to make a quick comment. Couple therapy is not wise because therapists don't understand this. They're not trained on this unless they've taken continuing education units on narcissism, on covert abuse, on domestic violence. And so they're going to not recognize these pillars. They're going to talk about how your spouse is feeling. And he or she is going to feel slighted and disrespected and all these things that are going to make you feel responsible, even though you weren't disrespectful. I mean, if you had an outburst, well, big deal, anybody would when they're dealing with covert abuse. But a therapist is not going to support you in that. You need to find a qualified abuse therapist, which we can help you with. You can email us, that unpacks their faulty thinking and beliefs, not their feelings. It's not time to talk about their feelings when their feelings are so distorted. It's time to unpack their beliefs, the belief of the faulty belief system, the entitlement, the image management, and a low emotional IQ, helping them develop an IQ. It's a very different approach. So please don't traumatize yourself by being in couples therapy. Okay, Jill.
Let me say real quick, you just answered the question I was going to ask, which this question said, what do you do when you find nobody is willing to hold your abuser accountable, and including the family court system? And you essentially just answered that by finding someone who will.
And I'm sorry about the court systems. There's, oh my goodness. It's such a bureaucracy of ignorance. Occasionally you get a good judge, but most of them don't have the training, don't understand this. And yeah, it's a really hard process to be in.
Yes.
Okay, Jill, as much as I could spend the whole rest of this time hearing people's comments and questions, let's save some to the end.
Sure.
I'll stay over as long as people want me to, but now I want to move on. So I'd like to briefly address the presence of covert abuse in various types of relationships and its effects. Covert emotional abuse happens in romantic relationships. It happens in families, like parent-child relationships, sibling relationships, aunts, uncles. Most often we hear about it in the context of romantic relationships, however. So let's start there. All it takes is a single behavior repeated in a pattern to be destructive to a relationship. I used the example of just lying before. Well, can you imagine how destructive that would be to a relationship, or how destructive withholding, even if just only withholding was happening, or only minimization how over time, that's just so, it's so toxic, it's so unhealthy. So it's just as toxic, but it's less confusing. So I just want to clarify that point, but don't think that if they're just doing one thing, that it isn't destructive, because it is. There's many signs of destructive power and control in a relationship. Before diving into them, I want to affirm your intuition, your gut feeling. So I want you to start noticing the way you feel, because if you can't pinpoint what just happened in the conversation, which most of us can't, it's so confusing, you can listen to your body. If it feels wrong, if you feel anxious or uncomfortable, or if you are start to worry, or you're fearful or confused, recognize how your body is responding to that. That is your best tool to inform you when you're confused. You can trust yourself to instinctively know that something is not okay, even if you can't pinpoint it. And if you cannot put your finger on it, your body will feel the effects, including anxiety, right? We all know how awful that feels. Listen to that and know that it's time to step away and try to maybe you what I used to do, and a lot of people find helpful, is to journal. Step away from the conversation. You can simply say, I'm hearing what you're saying, but I don't share your perspective. And this conversation's over. And you just walk into another room, lock the door, get your journal out, write down what you remember of the conversation, and then close it. And when you've calmed down, come back to it at another time, or write it down when you feel like you're in a good space to write it down. It'll help you later look back on when they're love bombing you. If you set a boundary and you're really firm with consequences, and then they start love bombing you, even though it's always just temporary, it will help you remember their tactics. It'll help inform you and prepare you for future conflict, and just remind you what they're really like. All of these behaviors increase a high level of stress hormones, which causes numerous mental and physical health symptoms. So it's really good to listen to your gut and your body. And in our 4-week cohort, we really talk about the effects on your body, and what you can, we help you identify what's really happening and why some of you might have physical illnesses from this prolonged stress, and how your endocrine system has just been out of whack with adrenaline and cortisol. We get into a lot of that. We get into how those stress hormones cause post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress, and we spend time on that as well. So now let's talk about coercive control. Coercive control includes behaviors such as threats, creating fear, using intimidation, and especially by placing limits on the victim so that the abuser can maintain a feeling of power and control. Coercive control defines behaviors that limit the victim's freedoms. So financial abuse is the form of coercive control. And you may not even realize you're being financially abused. Your spouse might say, honey, you're not good with the money, so I have it handled. Don't have to worry about it. I'm responsible. And it doesn't matter if your names are not on the accounts, because I have a trust and everything goes to you, and don't worry about it. But really, that is so financially abusive, to keep you in the dark and to control the finances and to have their names on documents that you're not included. That is time to quietly start making copies of documents without your spouse knowing, and go see an attorney and get some advice. Coercive control might appear as limiting who the victim can talk to, or how often they can talk to them, or how often you can see your family, that sort of thing. It's important to understand that no two abusive situations are the same. So to help you determine whether or not what you're experiencing in your romantic relationship or any relationship really is coercive control, I want to just, I normally spend more time on this in our cohort, but I'm just going to name off some bullet points for you. So it's feeling the need to ask permission to do something. Now, I'm not talking about a healthy relationship where there's open communication and both people are saying, I'd really like to golf this weekend. How do you feel about me golfing and you watching the kids, and then I'll watch the kids while you can go do something, that's just healthy communication. I'm talking about that you are feeling like you must ask permission and you must receive that permission, or you can't do it because your spouse is likely to get angry or have a reaction that's really strong and causes you fear. Or being isolated from family and friends and your support system is a really common one. Monitoring your whereabouts, wanting to always know where you are and that you have to text and answer your texts immediately. And like I said, no two abusive situations are the same. So you might only identify with one of these things, or some of you might identify with a lot of these things. They might monitor your communications with others. You may have a tracking device on your car and you don't even know it, or a tape recorder in your car. It depends on how escalated your relationship is into the category of abuse, but that's something you want to check out. It could also be jealous accusations being made against you that you're not guilty of and that your mind isn't even thinking of, but you're having to constantly reassure your partner because of their jealousy. It could be threats to you, your children, your pets, or others you hold dear. It doesn't have to be a physical threat, although it could be a physical threat. It could be things like, if you do that, then I'm going to tell so-and-so about your secret. Or, it could be any number of things where a threat is meant to stop you from your freedom to exercise your individuality and autonomy. It could be limited accesses to finances, including your own finances. It could be forced into sexual engagement that you don't want to participate in, or they guilt trip you and pout and cause a fit and say they're going to have an affair if you don't give it up or whatever. And it could be having patriarchal or other gender roles reinforced. These are all methods to maintain power and control in a way that is very unreasonable and that really limits your options. So now I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge covert abuse happening to children. Many kids today are emotionally abused by either a parent, a peer group, such as in bullying, or even a teacher. Psychological abuse of children rarely gets reported because it's difficult for outsiders to recognize, unless it's overt emotional abuse and they hear the yelling and screaming and they call CPS. But if it's covert, it really is difficult to identify it, and it mostly happens behind closed doors. And consequently, many abused children do not get the help they desperately need. So can you imagine a child being so totally confused after conversations, left to always be feeling at fault? Their brain is developing, and they need adults to affirm them and to validate their experiences, to uplift them, to help give them clarity. And so the damage has long-lasting effects that are really affect their brain development. With the stress and exhaustion of work or life, many parents will use these harmful tactics in their parenting, maybe without being an abuser. I remember I used to minimize. I'd be in a hurry, so I'd say, okay, I heard you. All right, let's go get dinner. Instead of stopping and saying, what are you telling me? Let me hear you. Let me sit down and take a few moments. And I'm here to listen, and really giving them my attention, and then saying, you have every right to feel that way. And I'm so sorry that happened to you. And then maybe If they ask for your guidance, then give them some guidance. But the most important thing is to be a quiet listener and to just have your hand holding their hand or something and validating them. That's what they need to build a sense of self-assuredness, to feel like they have solid ground under their feet. Otherwise, they grow up thinking something is wrong with them, that they're defective. And so it really has a long-lasting effect. A healthy parent, if they're doing these things, I mean, as soon as I read about minimization, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to address my kids, apologize, really explain it to them and how damaging it is, and really unpack it for them so that they can understand that about themselves and so they can understand my remorse. But an unhealthy parent will just switch to another tactic if they are called out for, one of these behaviors. They won't change. Abusive parents will regularly employ these harmful tactics as a means of powering over everyone in the family and drawing all positive attention to themselves. Or they may be really hard on their child and expect their child to perform to a level so that it reflects positively on themselves. In time, the child's identity and sense of worth are replaced by self-doubt, anxiety, fear, and even depression. And if you can imagine cortisol and adrenaline pumping through a child constantly, they're constantly in this fight, flight, or freeze trauma response and develop post-traumatic stress. So lastly, I'd like to acknowledge covert abuse in the workplace. An abusive coworker, for instance, may start leaving a particular colleague out of email threads. They might be included in the group and then sporadically taken out, like that you have to prepare for a meeting on so-and-so date, so they don't show up to the meeting prepared. And then everyone wonders why they didn't, everyone else got the email seeing who's doing what jobs, but they didn't get the email. That's just one example, but there's so many others. The covert abuser continues to use tactics of manipulation, even scapegoating them. That means that they will blame the victim in a public way, even though they're not responsible for what they're being blamed for, or they undermine them, and they'll give the appearance that they're on board, that the supervisor is on board and supportive, but they're always trying to make the coworker appear incompetent and irresponsible. Ideally, it's the best if the victim recognizes the abuse as unsupported in confronting the behavior, which may exist in plain sight. However, many factors can make it challenging for a victim of workplace abuse to confront their abuser. Obviously, fear of retaliation, fear of job loss or demotion may hinder someone from speaking up against workplace abuse. I say keep a paper trail, try to document everything. And before you go to HR, go see an attorney and get some advice. And it's really important for workplace leaders to make every effort to create a safe place for victims to disclose workplace harassment and abuse. Victims need to be certain that they'll be protected. So a healthy work environment will have policies in place that you can inquire about through your HR department, and you can see their policies usually in the employee handbook. Recognizing covert abuse in any relationship may leave you feeling lost, not knowing where to turn to for help, and so forth. And it's normal to experience a wide array of emotions, including shame, sadness, anger, rejection, hurt, fear, or even misplaced guilt. For many, it's hard to imagine how they got to this place and where to go from here. And if this is you, I want to leave you with ways that you can get help when you've experienced covert abuse. And the first thing I want to say is, even if your abuser is not forcing isolation on you, oftentimes we isolate ourselves because our stress and confusion causes us to be so out of sorts and preoccupied that we don't feel like socializing. And that's one reason why I really want you to learn the terms and definitions, because clarity is the first necessary step to healing. And once you have clarity, then you're still going to want to isolate yourself because you're going to perseverate over what are your options now. But I really encourage you to step out into community, to find a relationship that you trust, closest friends. They've likely been concerned about you for some time, but didn't know what was going on. And so you might feel relieved to open up, and they might feel relieved to hear you opening up. The most important thing anyone can do for you is to listen, to allow you the space to process your confusion and your experiences out loud, without interruption, without advice, without criticism, without judgment, without blaming you. To somebody who's really a supportive listener. That's the kind of person you want to look for. And if you confide in someone who attempts to tell you, well, you should do this or you should not do that, or any of the examples that I mentioned, then they're not safe and you're just going to be re-traumatized. So please don't try to convince them. It's likely going to be a lot of hard work and it's not really worth the effort. You could refer them to our website, which takes you out of that dynamic of having to work so hard to convince them when they're not in a mindset of listening. You can ask them to look at our website, which many people do, and it helps inform their family and friends. But if they're not safe and they're not going to be safe, just simply excuse yourself from the conversation and find someone else who's willing to be a safe listening ear and move on. But community is so important because victims cannot heal in isolation. We need love to flow into us. We're so starving of love because of the way we've been treated that it is really nourishing to have people validate you and tell you you're a good person and you don't deserve this. Nothing you did caused you to deserve this, no matter what your faults are. They don't rise to the occasion of justifying abuse. Abuse is a choice. It's never the victim's fault. And it's not an accident or a mistake. The abuser is choosing this. And that's where the responsibility needs to lie. The next thing I want to say is to seek therapy. If you can't afford a therapist, oftentimes domestic violence agencies will offer low-cost therapy based on what you can afford. And they're trained in domestic violence and some other aspects that have to do with your mindset. And so that could be helpful. There's also wonderful podcasts that you can listen to help you learn a lot. And if you are interested in those, you can email us. I'll just name a couple right off the bat. There's Flying Free with Natalie Hoffman. And she also has a support group where you can, for $29 a month, you can be part of a support group of women that really gets a lot of information and is allowed to process that information and have questions and answers. There's also, I don't remember the name of the podcast, but it's by Les, L-E-S Carter. And he talks a lot about healing and narcissism. And he has a nice calm voice and it's quite informative. I also want you to do things that just take care of yourself. Like maybe it's going for a walk in nature, going to the beach, wherever you are, into the forest, whatever. Taking a hot bath and having a nice cup of tea or a glass of wine, doing some kind of art therapy. All those things help you. You're not going to feel like doing any of it, but I promise you, if you force yourself, you will start your healing process. It requires multiple modalities like this to be able to get you on a healing journey where you're not so over functioning and hyper focused on what your spouse is doing, but you start really caring well for yourself. I mean, two people are taking care of your spouse right now. You are, and your partner is. Someone needs to stop and take care of you, and you are your best advocate. So I want you to really consider stretching yourself and doing that. If you know there are signs of abuse in your relationship and you've ignored them, or you recognize the signs in retrospect, please be gracious with yourself and forgive yourself. You did the best you could with the information you had at the time. Many people can relate to you, and many have gone before you who ignored the signs for one reason or another. And as you begin to get clarity, like I said, that's the first step to healing. You'll gain strength. And a lot of your confusion and the stress caused by confusion, because confusion causes stress, a lot of that will dissipate. And you'll be able to now consider what your options are and look into those things, which is much more productive than perseverating over these conversations that go in circles. You will not only gain strength, you will feel more confident to use your voice and to set boundaries with consequences. You'll be able to challenge covert destructive behaviors if you want to. You may choose to just disengage and say, I don't share your perspective, and go to another room, or stop, you're minimizing me, and I'm not, this conversation is over until you can respect me and have a mutually respectful conversation. There are ways that you can set boundaries by saying, if you don't, I'm going to leave, or I'm going to move into another bedroom, or I'm going to leave the house, or you're going to have to leave the house, or whatever. You just say the relationship is broken and you set the boundary, but you have to be willing to follow through on it. So if you're not ready to follow through with the consequences, then I don't recommend you setting a boundary, because it's just a complaint and they're not going to take you seriously, and it's going to water down your word value. It's a process that takes time. So be kind to yourself. And before we go into questions, as you know by now, these topics are deep. They have many layers to them, and they're tough to get to the bottom of. If you feel that a deeper dive in having someone hold your hand through navigating how to deal with these types of covert abuse and formulating proper responses to them, please join me over the next few weeks in our cohort. I think it starts in 2 weeks, and you can find it on our website. I promise you, you will glean an abundance of important knowledge to help you accelerate your journey. So with whatever knowledge you have now, it's going to give you so much more in such a comprehensive way that it's going to propel you on your journey. And the written curriculum and anonymous group sessions will be the fastest way to make headway in understanding and responding to these types of abuse. So to register, you type in themendproject.com/October-2023. So I hope I see you in October. Okay, now I'm going to take your questions. And I'll stay on as long as you're able. So if you have to leave, we understand. You can hear the questions and answers on the YouTube channel, but Jill, go ahead.
Sure thing. So I want to say I really appreciate all this chat is full, Annette. And so we will do our best.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. And it's amazing because it really helps everybody here to know you're not alone. And there are so many similar situations. Also, previously when we were doing a Q&A, Annette, I want to say for anybody asking questions about how to get someone to see when they don't see and all of that, if you need resources, support, recommendations, referrals for therapists, that kind of thing, can you reach out to us privately so we can give some options for you to look into? Because Annette has a lot of resources that she is sitting on that we love to share so that everybody gets the support that they need. Okay. So we have a number of questions and comments. I'm going to
don't try. If the question is, how can you get them to see? Don't try to get them to see on your own. It's just going to escalate things. They're not going to get it. You need professional help, really qualified professional help to help with that. So go ahead, Jill.
Sure. Okay, so it sounds like if you call an abuser out for a tactic, they just switch to a different one. So what do you do when you notice a tactic they're using?
The more you understand the terms and definitions, the more equipped you will be to say, now, okay, you were minimizing me and now you're deflecting. I'm telling you, I raised this reasonable complaint or concern or hurt. And if you're not willing to talk about that, then this conversation is over. You know, you just don't get engaged in the chaos. You're just going to get sucked into the vortex. It's better that you start learning how to emotionally detach. Don't think that your needs are going to be met. And as hard as that sounds, because I mean, I can relate, because for years I was like, well, maybe if I say it this way, or if I say it that way, maybe I don't know how to communicate effectively in a relationship. Maybe I'm unlovable. I had all these thoughts like maybe something's wrong with me and I just can't figure out what it is. We do all of this sort of perseverating, and it's really healthier to work on saying, you know, this is what they're capable of, and I don't want to engage in chaos. I need to stop the chaos. I need to find myself again. I need to get strong and clear-minded. Let that be your project. Let you be your project. As you are learning, you know, be insatiable about gathering information, reading books, doing our cohort, just gathering information. And then you can discern whether you want to go forward with therapy, and if your husband or wife would be willing to do that with a qualified individual. Otherwise, and I'm not talking about couple therapy, but a therapist, the way it works in a healthy way is that your abusive spouse will sign a release to the therapist, allowing the therapist to speak to you and you to speak to them. And so that you can give that therapist updates about what actually happened, instead of the distorted rendition that your spouse or partner will have. And so there's transparency, but this only works if it's with a qualified therapist, and we can help you with that if you reach out to us. I don't know why I got off on that. I forgot what the question was.
Well, it was really good you did, because it's very helpful.
Okay.
And so, is there a way to support them in developing their emotional IQ, yet stay emotionally safe yourself? Our couples therapist seems to think that by me sharing how his actions make me feel, that my husband will gain insight and empathy, but I don't feel comfortable sharing how I feel, since I know it is not heard or taken seriously.
I think that your therapist is misguided. They don't understand how entrenched the beliefs are of an abuser. They don't understand how self-protective they are. They have a shield of self-protection. Unless you are showing them empathy and adoration, they feel contempt for you because you're not meeting their needs. They don't have the capacity to feel what you're feeling. They might have the capacity to say, you're the most important person in the world to me. I love you. But they don't know what love is. They don't walk it out in their life with you. And so you're just going to be wasting money. And I really mean that. Believe me, my husband and I went through many years of therapy. We would try 3 years with this therapist, 3 years with it, and we went to top-notch therapists. They knew nothing. Nobody called it out until we got to somebody who was an expert in this topic. And then it was an entirely different situation. I was totally supported. He was confronted. They really helped him unpack his faulty thinking. They held him accountable. They held me accountable to hold him accountable. It was just a very different experience all the way around. So I just, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, I wouldn't do it. unless you could have your therapist take our training. We do offer continuing education units through the American Psychological Association. And I teach the class with one of the top therapists in the country, Dr. David Hawkins. And it's very informative. But even if they took this cohort that's coming up, they're going to learn so much more and they'll be able to be more supportive. But coming from where they're coming from without having domestic violence experience in, I mean, truly experience like continuing education units in narcissism and covert emotional abuse, they're not going to be equipped. Okay, next question.
Okay, with coercive control, can a child be used to monitor a victim? For example, insisting that a stepchild be required to go everywhere with the victim.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, how do you help? So this is from a male, and so I think that helps provide insight. How do you help a therapist understand that covert narcissism is not gender specific?
Oh boy. Well, if your therapist doesn't understand that, honestly, regardless of how much time you've spent there, I would move on. If you have to convince somebody and it's your therapy and they're defensive, they're just not in the right mindset to be able to help this complicated topic. You really need validation and support. You can have them go to our website, and there is such a thing as matriarchy, where the woman controls what is going on in the family dynamics, who the good team is, and if you're on the bad team, who's on the ins, who's on the outs, what you're allowed to talk about, what you're not allowed to tell anyone. You know, they're like secret keepers and they're covert abusers, and they distort the truth, they tell lies. So this is not a strictly male abuser situation. And if you have to explain that, I just think that you're not with a person who's going to truly be able to help you. You can try having them look at our website, but if they still seem, and you'll be listen to your gut, if you still notice that they're reluctant or hesitant, or they make comments that they made before they looked at our website, it's just not worth your time. You're paying them. There are experts out there. That's who you should be with. It's going to be an entirely different experience where they're really helping you, and you have somebody really safe to be sharing these dynamics with. Okay, next question.
Okay, we have a few more. This one's a little bit longer, so if you need me to pause or repeat, just let me know. So what about when it's covert, overt, and physical? I listened to a video last night with David Hawkins and Dr. Hunt, and she talked about telling my whole story. I never know where to start. Being in a same-sex marriage with a woman who is the embodiment of toxic masculinity has only caused dismissal of my experience because there's an assumption of equanimity and blindness to the reality of an unequal power dynamic similar to those of abusive heterosexual relationships. So the abuser gets away with enough because they know how to engage the listener from a fabricated emotional state and then leverage that triumph to engage in more emboldened abuse.
Okay, the first part of the question, what was the actual question?
What about when it's covert, overt, and physical? I never know where to start when telling my whole story.
Oh gosh. Well, first off, I want to say that in the LGBTQ plus community, there's actually higher levels of domestic violence. So if somebody doesn't recognize that, they don't understand statistics. And if you are having difficulty having somebody believe you and support you, then the person isn't safe. I think that you should really refrain from telling people that aren't going to be supportive of you, because when you're not supported, we call that double abuse. It's actually a very traumatizing experience to go through when people don't believe you, when you're so vulnerable and you're sharing such a important secret. And then you fear that they're going to tell your partner or tell other people in a distorted view. It becomes overwhelming and very traumatizing. So I would be really selective who you choose to talk with. And the sad fact about abuse is that victims they end up giving up friends or changing communities because it just becomes too overwhelming at times if they aren't feeling supported. And support is essential to your healing. So, like for me, I completely pulled away from my Christian community that was really wrongly judging me, not believing me, and so forth. And I started doing physical activities. I didn't want to, but I forced myself to start doing exercise classes and physical activities, and reaching out to some of my more secular friends who were much more supportive for me in my situation. That's not always the case. But so you have to accept the fact that you're not going to convince everyone. You're not going to convince very many, and they don't want to be bothered becoming educated. Sadly, this is a taboo topic in our society. It should be something that's so out in the open. That's one of the driving objectives that we at the Men Project want to raise awareness so that people understand this, but people don't, and even therapists don't, like I said. So I think you just need to you have to be realistic about your objectives. But I'm so sorry you're going through that. And I would document everything. I would have a recorder going. If there's physical violence, try to set up your phone to be able to record what's happening, and be willing to call the police. Be willing to allow them to experience consequences, because that is the best way for this to stop. When we protect the abuser, we're really just emboldening them. It's not just others who embolden them. We embolden them by not having strong boundaries with consequences. And you may not be ready to do that yet, but set your mind on that as a goal and inform yourself, be a voracious reader, watch our YouTube videos, gain as much knowledge as you can. They're so informative. We go deeper on a lot of different topics that relate to this. So that's what I encourage you to do until you're strong enough to do that.
Really good and helpful, Annette. We had a number of people actually speak about not being believed by people in their life, whether it was a professional like a therapist or a friend who had always been there, or someone who said there's two sides to every story, all the different responses. We had a lot of this in the chat today. So thank you for all.
There is no neutrality in abuse. If somebody takes a neutral stand and says, well, it's 50-50, or there's two sides to every story, that benefits only one person, the abuser. It harms the victim. So that person is not safe. And you can try communicating what I just said, but if they are dismissing you in that way, they don't seem like they're really interested in really understanding what you're going through.
So we do have a comment and a question. This comment is actually about a couples therapist. And I'll just say this real quick, Annette, but in the comments, we have a lot of people who are saying like couples therapy only adds to the abuse. Therapists only make it worse. So we have a lot of people who have
gone through that.
Yes, they have a lot of experience.
I know. I'm so sorry, because misdirected therapy like that is a form of double abuse, which exacerbates your trauma. In fact, some double abuse situations mischaracterize you in the most sacred of spaces, that you can transition from post-traumatic stress disorder into complex post-traumatic stress, which is a much more serious form of trauma to heal from. And so I want you to be really cautious. I want you to have community, but I also want you to guard your heart and understand who you're communicating with. That's why when I isolated, and I had two friends who were willing to listen to me without saying, well, you should do this and you should do that, or, well, what are you going to do about it? You know, I just had so many, some people were saying, you need to leave. Other people are saying, you have to stay. You need to submit more. You need to pray. I mean, it was all this barrage of advice that I didn't ask for. I just wanted a good listening ear and help me process what I'm going through. It was very hard to find, but what I found so helpful was doing these exercise classes. If you go regularly, you see the same faces, you start to make fun, friendships that are more on a superficial layer, but that still can feed into you. It can feed endorphins into you. You don't have to tell everyone about your problem. You can save that for, a few important people in your life. And if you have a big community, all the better. But if you don't, if you just do other things to supplement, I couldn't keep tapping in on the same two friends and monopolize all their time. They were so generous, but I didn't want to overstay my welcome. I wanted to be respectful. And so I found it was really helpful for me to stay away from my friends that were judging me and who aren't my friends anymore. And it was actually the best thing that ever happened to me. I can say now in hindsight, it was so traumatic and unnerving and really harmful on my mental and physical health. But in the long run, I have a much healthier group of friends now that would never impose upon me their ideals. We support each other, and physical activity has been, like, I know I'm harping on that, but it really helps you get a lot of positivity, and doing physical activity is also just really healthy on your body, because otherwise depression and anxiety really takes a toll and you get weaker and your health is compromised. And so I want you to take care of yourself to try to be as healthy as you can going through this kind of stress. Okay, next question.
Yes. So what do I do if my husband is now meeting weekly with our pastor to pray about our relationship? I want my husband to have support, but it is now making me feel uncomfortable at church.
I would definitely feel uncomfortable too. Your husband is meeting with the pastor and he's sharing his narrative, not yours. And I doubt that the pastor is asking this important question. Well, tell me what your wife must be feeling. If you asked your husband that question, which I doubt he has, your husband isn't going to know the answer because he isn't in tune with your feelings. He doesn't really care how you're feeling. He might really want the relationship to work, but he doesn't want to self-examine and be held accountable. So he's aligning with the pastor. That's what's happening. And the more the pastor hears from him, the more he is not going to believe you. And that's just a sad commentary on what goes on in so many of our churches. Very few churches are trained in domestic violence. And men often are more comfortable meeting with male pastors with husbands rather than they are with women. And so you're in a dilemma. And if you find a woman at church that you can confide in, she's not going to have the same power that the male pastor has. So I personally would want to limit that. And you could try having a meeting with the pastor and printing off some of our materials and taking them with you. or writing them a letter, and I could, somebody on our team could help you with that letter. But if your pastor turns against you, you risk losing your whole community. And that's what happened to me. It wasn't my pastor, but it was Bible study leaders in a big community. And they just didn't believe me. And so I was mischaracterized. And when you're mischaracterized in your sacred community, you feel like you have lost your identity. And one of the necessary components to develop complex post-traumatic stress is a loss of identity. So I just want you to be very cautious about how you choose to proceed and really protect yourself. And if you need to talk that over, you can email me at Annette@themenproject.com.
Annette, I just am going to say one more comment that is shared here for you to hear. This person put a laughing emoji saying, it's funny what you said, but also so sad that another comment came in, that in a place that you go to for help, you have to encounter more of the same dynamic. And I was starting to reply, but I thought it'd be great for you to say, we actually start the training program that we do and the cohort that we use with talking about cultural biases and how abuse is really on much bigger of a scale, a problem, and is sustained through cultural biases and all of that. So I don't know if you want to quickly touch on that, but that is being noticed by what you said in response to the pastor situation.
Yeah, so in different cultures, I mean, we all have biases. We might not want to admit that we have biases, but based on how we were brought up and how we were taught about other communities and what our perceptions are or our experiences as we grew up with other communities, we have these biases that everybody in that community is the same way. And so in churches, if they're not trained in domestic violence, they often choose, it's called complementarianism versus egalitarianism. So complementarian churches believe in male headship, and in egalitarian churches, they actually go to the original Greek and Hebrew translations to get their interpretations, and they believe in equality. And so there's already a bias against women in a patriarchal church culture that is going to be really hard for you to go up against. You might find that you have a really compassionate and open-minded pastor, but that may not be the case at all. And so we do talk a lot about different biases and what we need to do to overcome them and how we can self-examine and help other people examine in our cohort. So another plug for the cohort.
I think that's it for questions today, Annette. And if I've missed any, please, like Annette said, please send us an email. And Annette does address.
Yeah, please do. Okay, well, then I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for being here. We'll be back again next month. Hopefully, we're really striving to start doing more of these workshops, more on a weekly basis. And so keep an eye out for that. But until next time, take really good care of yourself. God bless. Bye-bye.